Welcome to Higher Education in the Crossfire. What's at risk? This webinar is sponsored by Alt Liberal Arts. Alt Liberal Arts is a global initiative concerned with freedom to learn, civic engagement, and advancement of the liberal arts. In collaboration with Bard College and the Global Higher Education Alliance for the 21st Century, Alt Liberal Arts offers free global online lectures for which you can register at altliberalarts.org. These lectures would not be possible without support from the Open Society Foundation and Bard College. There's a Q&A at the bottom of your screen where you can enter your questions or comments throughout this online seminar, and I look forward to addressing as many of your questions as time allows. So let's get started. American higher education is, as we all know, at an inflection point, confronting a convergence of pressures that challenge not only its effectiveness and legitimacy, but also its fundamental mission and purpose. Public trust has dramatically declined, confidence in the value of a college degree is eroding, and concerns about affordability, access, liberal bias, and the capacity of colleges and universities to prepare students for a rapidly changing 21st century workforce are escalating, exposing growing misalignments between what colleges promise and what students, employers, and society experience that lead them to ask, is higher education delivering on its promises? At the same time, the proliferation of generative AI is shaping how knowledge is created, accessed, and evaluated, raising critical questions about the nature of learning, the relevance of grades and what counts as evidence of learning, and how to safeguard academic integrity in a world where the boundaries between human and machine cognition are increasingly blurred. Layered onto this are student mental health issues, anxiety, depression, despair, which have surpassed financial considerations as the primary reason that students are either dropping out of college or not attending in the first place. This is one factor contributing to falling enrollment that has been precipitated by demographic shifts and growing restrictions placed on international students who are seeking to study in the U.S. Meanwhile, burgeoning student needs and budget constraints, faculty are being called on to do more with less. And not only are students experiencing anxiety, depression, and despair, but faculty are experiencing burnout at alarming rates. Each of these challenges are unfolding against the backdrop of an unraveling partnership that has existed between higher education and the government since World War II. Escalating culture wars and the intensifying politicization of higher education have led to the weaponization of research funds and unprecedented governmental overreach into every aspect of college and university operations, from academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and shared governance to who gets admitted. In addition, recent provisions contained in the One Big Beautiful Bill measure accountability of colleges and universities solely in terms of immediate employability and average salary earned, placing additional pressure on colleges and universities to defend liberal education, even as its core aims of cultivating critical thinking, ethical reasoning, civic responsibility, and the capacity for lifelong learning are more crucial than ever in an unpredictable post-industrial society. These prevailing headwinds test whether higher education can continue to serve as a space for independent inquiry, evidence-based reasoning, and democratic deliberation. Campus leaders are experiencing skyrocketing levels of moral distress, where they feel coerced into making decisions they believe are unethical, but they feel they have no choice. And in many instances, that moral distress is morphing into a kind of moral injury that results from the continual erosion of one's moral compass, forcing them to continually revisit the question of how much individual injustice should I be willing to countenance for the sake of long-term reform. While often treated as discrete problems to be managed, taken together, these challenges point to a deeper issue, namely that the current design of higher education no longer comports with the social, economic, and technological realities it's meant to serve. American higher education as it stands today was largely designed for an industrial economy defined by stable careers and predictable pathways. That world no longer exists. Today's economy is dynamic, AI mediated, and marked by constant change. Careers are nonlinear, work is fragmented, and the most valuable skills are those that enable individuals to adapt, interpret, and create meaning amid uncertainty. This is where the strength of the liberal arts and sciences are most evident. At its best, liberal education has always held a dual purpose to prepare individuals for meaningful work and to sustain the habits of heart and mind upon which engagement in democracy depends. But fulfilling that promise requires more than defending the status quo. The challenge before us is whether we will redesign liberal education to meet this moment and ensure that the aims are structured, delivered, and connected to opportunity. Rather than incremental change, these times call for an expansive and comprehensive reimagining of what liberal education means and more intimately integrating it into learning, work, and democratic life. So, what follows is a framework for that redesign organized around six interrelated principles. First, institutions must more clearly integrate curriculum and career pathways. Students need structured, visible connections between what they study and the opportunities available to them. This doesn't mean reducing education to job training, but rather ensuring transparency in assignment design and promoting authentic assessment from the first to final semesters, in which students are asked to demonstrate their skills, competencies, and mindsets while reflecting on learning experiences inside and outside of the classroom, connecting them to career goals through portfolios. It also requires that all students have access to applied experiential integrative learning grounded in the liberal arts that translate knowledge into practice. As we integrate curriculum to career, we also need to account for the fact that students aren't only looking for jobs, they're seeking meaningful work. The latest SERP studies out of UCLA that measure first-year students' attitudes going into four-year programs show that the highest percentage of students ever, 87.9% of students, say that the primary reason they're attending college is to get a good job. But more than 95% of students report that they want more than that. They want lives of meaning and purpose. Though increasingly marginalized from the mainstream curriculum, fostering lives of meaning and purpose is foundational to a liberal education designed to nurture the skills and dispositions that will lead to human flourishing for the sake of both the learner and the community. By embracing and reaffirming this as central to liberal education's mission, perhaps colleges and universities can reactivate our own sense of purpose and begin to restore public trust in the enduring and transformative power of American higher education, not merely as a means of getting a good job, but also as a catalyst for living a good life, even in the absence of a good society. Of course, this in turn necessitates re-envisioning reward structures that privilege publication, peer-reviewed journal articles, and research over teaching excellence, service, and mentorship that we know make a difference to the long-term success of students, even decades after graduation. Second, AI literacy must be embedded across all disciplines. As generative AI reshapes knowledge production and work, students need more than technical familiarity. They must understand how to critically and ethically engage with the tools within those fields. At the same time, the distinctively human capacities cultivated through liberal education, judgment, interpretation, creativity, and moral reasoning, become even more essential. AI literacy isn't just about knowing how to ask the right prompts. It includes understanding how AI systems are trained, recognizing bias and limitations, and evaluating outputs critically. Students need to ask not just, how do I use this, but should I trust this? Ultimately, AI literacy is about student agency. Because AI isn't a discrete discipline and is intended as a foundational letter shaping all fields, it must become a core expectation, not an elective enhancement. According to AAC&U's latest research on employers and AI, 99% of employers say that within the next 5 years, they will expect all of their employees to be proficient in AI. And yet, 95% of faculty report that they're not themselves proficient. Therefore, institutions must invest in faculty development to close that gap between employer expectations and instructional capacity. Third, institutions must recenter humanistic inquiry and moral imagination, imagining what it's like to be in the shoes of another different from oneself. Moral imagination entails the essential capacity to empathize and understand the perspectives of others, preventing dehumanization. In these days of growing polarization and partisanship, higher education has a vital role to play in helping students grapple with complexity, difference, and ethical ambiguity. Rather than ancillary, this dimension of learning, which includes developing critical listening skills and mindsets of intellectual humility, is foundational to effective leadership, democratic participation, and workforce preparation. The foregrounding of moral imagination and humanistic identification in liberal education helps explain findings from our colleague Tony Carnevale's research that he conducted when he was heading the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce. He and his colleagues issued a report on taming authoritarian attitudes that revealed that those who've had a liberal education are 7 times less likely to exhibit authoritarian preferences, precisely because liberal education fosters critical thinking, openness in diverse perspectives, and psychological security when confronted with disagreement, reducing the appeal of rigid, one answer worldviews. In fact, the study concludes that liberal education is, quote, a cornerstone of successful democracies and acts as a bulwark against authoritarianism. Fourth, colleges and universities must enact pedagogies of kindness and care, grounded in trust, transparency, and belonging. Liberal education for the future will require institutions to rethink how they teach. For far too long, colleges and universities have adhered to models of ranking and sorting in which excellence is measured by asking students to respond to questions for which we already have the answers on standardized tests, instead of asking them to wrestle with the grand challenges and wicked problems confronting our societies locally and globally, and of which COVID-19 was emblematic. Students today are navigating extraordinary levels of uncertainty, stress, and complexity, and yet our pedagogies remain rooted in a framework of exclusion and endurance, despite the distinctiveness of this moment, which calls for a transition to pedagogies of kindness, approaches that center trust, transparency, and care. Contrary to the dominant narrative, kindness is not antithetical to academic excellence. It's a precondition for it. If we want students to be intellectually adventurous, to engage deeply, and to persist through challenges, we must create environments in which they feel supported in doing so. AAC&U Senior Fellow Sia Sheldon does work on cognitive bandwidth, in which she talks about the ways in which racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, other forms of discrimination actually reduce the capacity of students to learn both inside and outside of the classroom. We know that students with food and shelter insecurity have specific challenges as well. But she points out that the biggest bandwidth stealer of them all is belonging uncertainty. And so we have to ensure that each of our campuses, each of our classrooms, are places of welcome and belonging, and work toward restoring cognitive bandwidth in each of our students. There's a growing body of literature focused on this approach. At our latest class meeting, College Learning and Student Success, that was held in Tucson, we had two keynote speakers, an opening keynote speaker Kevin McClure, who has written The Caring University, and a closing speaker, J.T. Torres, Teaching, Learning, and Caring in Higher Education. These are one of many scholars, and I want to highlight two who were focused on pedagogies of kindness, trauma-informed pedagogies, as a way of meeting the enjoinder that I just issued. The first is Kate Denial. Kate is a history professor at Knox College, and she makes the case for challenging the status quo by applying compassion to every situation and finding a space for all students to do their best work by making classrooms accessible for everyone. For her, kindness is linked to justice, requiring professors to consider students' complex lives, identities, and challenges. This takes the form of collaborating with students around ways in which syllabi, assignments, and assessments are designed, as well as how their life experiences should be respected in the classroom. Her commitment to believing students and believing in students goes a long way toward upending the transactional models of higher education, which we've depended upon for so long, and promoting models of transformation at the core of AAC and U's work. The second scholar I want to point to is Professor Mays Emad, who is a neurobiologist at Connecticut College. She also calls for a radically different approach to delivering liberal education, one that destabilizes the competitive structures failing students and faculty. Emad, who studies trauma-informed pedagogy and looks at the physiological and psychological impacts of trauma on student learning, uses her findings on the neurobiology of learning to address how institutions can meet their educational missions at a time when so many students are experiencing chronic stress and burnout. Pushing back against current expectations that students should prioritize purely intellectual pursuits like research while leaving the rest of the world behind, she argues that, quote, we must cultivate healthy and meaningful relationships between the learner, knowledge, self, peers, professors, and communities by highlighting how what we are studying connects to the world beyond the classroom. She wants her students to experience a pedagogy of wholeness and interconnectedness that allows them to uncover deeper truths about their inner selves, about fellow human beings, and about the world, noting that her students want more out of their education than courses packed with content, frequently devoid of personal connections and the creative and collaborative problem solving of real world challenges. For her, the crucial question is, quote, do I have an ethical responsibility to truly listen and accommodate students' suggestions and expectations? Or should I adhere to a curriculum increasingly influenced by industry demands and expectations? What this type of departure from past norms necessitates leads to a fifth recommendation, namely that institutions move beyond cultivating individual resilience within broken systems to systemic level reform. As Shakespearean scholar Jessica Riddell reminds us in her work on hope circuits, many of the structures that exhaust students, faculty, and communities are broken and functioning exactly as they were designed. Drawing on the work of psychologists focused on rewiring the brain and the metaphor of electrical circuits being rewired to operate better once complex systems are understood, she asks, how do we design hopeful and resilient systems for ourselves and rewire mindsets from scarcity to abundance thinking and from crisis to flourishing? Building hope circuits entails embarking on systems level reimagining of the university in ways that invest strategically in models that expand opportunity, enhance experimentation and risk taking, and treat failure as a vital component of learning and innovation. Doing so requires an understanding that persistent scarcity mindsets, narrow imagination, and reinforce zero-sum approaches to change. Abundance is not about having more, but it's about seeing and using what we have more efficiently. Hope, in this sense, is not a luxury, it's a necessity, a condition for meaningful, equitable, and future-oriented liberal education. In the end, Riddell argues for engaging in social movement building that unites us through shared purpose and a commitment to unlearning and relearning. She suggests that this begins with slowing down to surface assumptions embedded in our institutions, engaging in divergent thinking, living into the question, staying with complexity, and reframing discomfort as an essential feature of growth rather than as a flaw to be eliminated. Crisis, in this view, is not an aberration, but a condition that can catalyze creativity and transformation. Finally, in a deindustrialized society marked by economic dislocation and widening inequities, the future of liberal education depends upon colleges and universities embracing their role as anchor institutions, demonstrating that their success is inextricably linked to the psychological, social, economic health, and educational well-being of those in the communities in which they're located and those they seek to serve. When communities struggle, institutions cannot fully thrive. The vitality of one is bound to the flourishing of the other. This shift requires a fundamental reorientation of purpose. As Hunter College President Nancy Cantor has argued, the Academy must get past asserting our expertise and telling communities what we're good at, and instead engage in a more generative and more difficult set of work. That is, asking what we're good for and what communities need from us. This means listening carefully to communities, asking about their defined needs and aspirations, and co-creating solutions that are responsive, reciprocal, and sustained. It requires not only humility, but a willingness to share authority and a recognition that knowledge is distributed across communities, not held exclusively within the gates of academia. In practice, this anchor mission calls for institutions to integrate teaching, research, and service in ways that directly contribute to community well-being. Liberal education is uniquely positioned to support this work. Students can be active participants in addressing real-world challenges, partnering with local organizations, contributing to public problem solving, and developing the capacities needed for democratic life. Faculty scholarship can be oriented toward public impact, informed by and accountable in community contexts. Institutional resources, physical, intellectual, and economic, can be leveraged to support local development, from workforce pathways to public health initiatives. Equally important is the recognition that well-being is multidimensional. Educational opportunities cannot be disentangled from issues such as mental health, housing security, environmental conditions, and economic stability. Anchor institutions must therefore work across sectors, building partnerships with schools, healthcare providers, business, civic organizations, and industry to address these interconnected challenges. In doing so, they help construct ecosystems of support that enable individuals and communities not only to persist, but to flourish. This approach also reframes the relationship between liberal education and workforce development. Rather than positioning them as competing priorities, anchor institutions can align them through pathways that are both economically meaningful and broadly educative, preparing individuals for work, citizenship, and lifelong learning. By grounding these efforts in the lived realities of their communities, institutions can ensure that educational programs are not abstract or disconnected, but relevant, accessible, and transformative. Ultimately, to serve as true anchors is to recognize that higher education is a public good with obligations that extend beyond campus boundaries. It is to commit to a model of mutual flourishing where the success of the institution is measured by the extent to which it contributes to the well-being and possibility of the communities they call home. Across all six principles, equity must function as a core design requirement. Without intentional attention, new models, particularly those involving technology and experiential learning, risk reproducing or exacerbating existing disparities. The students most affected by economic and technological disruption are often those historically underserved by higher education. That means ensuring that all students have access to high-impact learning and clear pathways to opportunity is essential to both institutional mission and to public legitimacy. So, where does this all leave us? For institutional leaders, this framework suggests several priorities: redesigning general education to emphasize integration and application, embedding AI and digital fluency across the curriculum, incentivizing faculty innovation in teaching and program design, strengthening partnerships beyond the campus, and aligning mission, resource allocation, and student outcomes more deliberately. These are not modest adjustments, but neither are they unattainable. Many institutions are already experimenting with elements of this approach. The challenge is to move from isolated innovation to coherent redesign. At AAC&U, we believe deeply in the power of liberal education, but belief alone is insufficient. This is a moment for action. We're not simply redesigning curricula, we're redefining the relationship between education and opportunity. The question before us is not whether higher education will change, it already is. The question is whether we will shape that change with intention or be shaped by the forces that are beyond our control. At its core, liberal education isn't simply about preparing students for the world as it is. It is about equipping them to imagine and create the world as it could be. That mission has never been more necessary, and the responsibility to realize it has never been more urgent. That kind of transformational change requires courageous leadership. Yet the college presidency, once regarded as one of the most respected roles in American public life, now itself stands as a crossroad. It has never been more challenging or more fraught. Throughout much of the 20th century, college and university presidents were public figures whose authority extended well beyond their campuses. They were not only institutional executives, but civic leaders, often called upon to comment on issues of national importance. Presidents like Theodore Hesburgh, Clark Kerr, Derek Bach, Mary McLeod Bethune exemplified this model of leadership. Reverend Hesburgh, president of the University of Notre Dame from 1952 to 1987, became a significant voice on civil rights, on labor disputes, on national policy debates. His leadership was influential in decisions made by Congress and in the White House, demonstrating the potential for a college president to shape public discourse beyond higher education. Similarly, Clark Kerr, president of the University of California system during the 1960s, played a decisive role in expanding access to public higher education through the California Master Plan, a blueprint that balanced elite research universities, comprehensive state colleges, and community colleges. Kerr resisted public pressure to order harsh crackdowns on student protests during the Vietnam War era. He fought to preserve the university as a space for open intellectual dissent and sought negotiated solutions during tumultuous times. When Ronald Reagan ran for governor of California in 1966, Kerr was criticized for his liberal academic governance and resistance to political interference. Campus disorder became a symbolic issue in the gubernatorial campaign and contributed to Kerr's dismissal by the UC regents the following year. Yet his reputation grew even after his removal, precisely because he privileged long-term institutional integrity over short-term political expediency. Like Kerr, Derek Bach, president of Harvard University in two separate terms from 1971 to 1991, and then again as interim from 2006 to 2007, leveraged the power and prestige of his office to engage with broader societal debates about issues of ethics, public policy, and social responsibilities of universities. He championed interdisciplinary programs, expanded professional schools, encouraged innovation in teaching, curriculum development, and assessment, and promoted the study of ethics in the professions. A hallmark of Bach's leadership was connecting Harvard to national issues. He advocated public service as a key educational value, strengthened programs in government, health, and education, and encouraged community-based learning. Bach expanded Harvard's academic depth, diversity, and civic mission while navigating economic and political storms with steady, principled leadership. His success was grounded in a thoughtful consensus building and forward-looking approach to the office. Mary McLeod Bethune was another beacon of excellence in academic leadership during the last century. Born to formerly enslaved parents in the Jim Crow South, Bethune founded the Daytona Educational and Industrial Training School for Negro girls with just $1.50 in her pocket, eventually building it into Bethune-Cookman University. She collaborated across sectors to garner support from philanthropists, community leaders, and national politicians. She also broke barriers in government, serving as an advisor to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and directing the Division of Negro Affairs of the National Youth Administration. Like Hesburgh, Kerr, and Bach, the moral stance of the office of the college presidency allowed her to speak on issues ranging from civil rights to national policy without being dismissed as a partisan actor. The college presidency, as enacted by each of these leaders, served as a bridge between the academy and the public and as a platform for framing societal conversation by virtue of their expertise and character. They were able to flourish in part due to an environment marked by public trust in higher education, strong political support, and a collective belief in the public purpose of American colleges and universities. Thus, the authority of this group of presidents rested not only on the esteem in which the position was held, but also on the credibility of the individual institutions that they led and the prevailing ideals regarding the entirety of higher education as a sector. Unlike earlier generations of college and university presidents who were viewed as thought leaders and had the luxury of focusing almost exclusively on enhancing the prominence and academic standards of their own institutions, the position today is defined by mounting organizational complexity and precariousness. The familiar foundations that have supported the moral and professional authority of campus leaders over the past century, long tenures, stable funding, bipartisan support, and a general respect for expertise, are being undermined. In addition, the college presidency enjoyed broad autonomy in the past, with boards intervening primarily around financial issues. Contemporary boards are far more hands-on, imposing more performance metrics and shorter runways for success. Expectations for presidents are increasingly driven by partisan agendas crafted by board members who are either appointees or of legislators or governors. Such boards are frequently under public pressure to take strong stances on a variety of controversial matters impacting presidential leadership. As a result, there's been mounting tension between governing boards and college presidents over the past decade, contributing to an adversarial as opposed to collaborative relationship. Governing boards want presidents who are going to make rapid change, who are entrepreneurs, who will increase enrollment and rankings while engaging in continuous fundraising and the identification as well as delivery of alternative sources of revenue. Never mind that few board members have ever worked in academic institutions, and neither fewer have served as presidents. For this reason, there are greater risks these days of boards transgressing the boundaries between governance and management when attempting to fulfill their responsibilities, and of undermining an academic culture that is defined by shared governance. Because they're calling on presidents to act rapidly, even if it means unilateral decision-making. It perhaps comes as no surprise then that the tenure of college and university presidents has declined dramatically. from an average of 8.5 years in 2006 to just 5.9 years a decade later. The changing nature of the relationship between governing boards and presidents has amplified faculty concerns over the expanding corporatization of higher education. Shifts in presidential priorities have precipitated a breakdown of trust and led to greater conflict between faculty and campus leaders. As the role of the college president has become more external facing, with increased attention paid to boards, donors, and other stakeholders, the move away from faculty-centric leadership has meant that votes of no confidence are on the rise. And while these votes are non-binding, these expressions of discontent have the potential of destabilizing the institution, especially since 51% of presidents who have experienced votes of no confidence leave their posts within a year of those votes. Along with board member and faculty discontent, students are becoming more mistrustful of campus leaders as well. Findings from a 2024 student voice survey found that 28% of students report not much trust in their college presidents. This level of distrust in campus leaders exceeds the lack of trust students have in professors and academic department heads by 18 and 13 percentage points, respectively. Highly charged social and global issues over the past few decades have placed presidents at the center of controversy, leading to a period of intense student activism that we haven't seen since the 1960s. At the same time, more Americans than ever before have had access to post-secondary education. But as we've noted earlier, there are deep tensions between access and affordability, academic freedom and external expectations, and between market imperatives and commitments to the public good. Presidents increasingly find themselves confronted by multiple constituencies, faculty, staff, students, board members, and the broader public, issuing unconditional, non-negotiable demands, often at odds with one another. A complicating factor is social media, where controversies often go viral before ever reaching the president's desk. As a result, college and university presidents continue to face increasing professional pressure and ethical strain as they navigate ongoing dilemmas about institutional decision-making and long-term strategy and shifting regulatory and public expectations. But despite these monumental challenges, this is also a moment of extraordinary opportunity to reimagine the college presidency and to reinterpret the crucial values of those in positions who must embody particular values while traversing a radically altered landscape. Reflecting on examples of strong leaders from the past offers a roadmap for contemporary leaders. Moral authority coupled with public engagement can accelerate and sustain institutional legitimacy, even in periods of uncertainty. Successful higher education leaders in the future will have to push beyond their comfort zone. This is a lesson I learned from an unexpected source of wisdom during my service as Mount Holyoke's 18th president. When I was appointed to the position in 2010, I was thrilled to be able to return to an institution that had shaped my life and my career in such a significant way. I loved every minute of engaging with students, faculty, and staff on our alma mater's stunningly beautiful campus. I reveled in the guest speakers, Rachel Maddow, Jhumpa Lahiri, America Ferrara, Anita Hill, loved reading faculty publications and going to art shows and student performances, co-teaching with my colleagues in African American studies and biology and economics and sociology. But I have to confess that my favorite day as the president of Mount Holyoke College was when I was asked to throw out the first pitch at a Red Sox game. My lifelong passion for the Red Sox was well known to those on campus and in the extramural community. And the invitation came when a Mount Holyoke alum who was married to one of the team's co-owners invited me to a game and surprised me with this honor of throwing out the first pitch. So I can remember frantically running around the president's house trying to find a baseball that wasn't part of my prize collection so I could practice. When we arrived at the park, I was greeted by the Sox's president and CEO at the time, Larry Lucchino, who brought me into the dugout to meet the players and then waited with me at the edge of the field before I was escorted out to the mound. It was one of those moments of pure joy when you think, how will I ever do this? And is this even possible? It was a bit like I felt when I was giving birth to our twins. But the advice that he gave me at the moment when I turned to him and said, uh, any advice on what I should do? That advice has stayed with me since that day in 2011. He said, throw higher and harder than you think you need to. And what I realize now is that his dictum was a profound metaphor for academic leadership, especially for those of us who lead from the margins, women, gender diverse leaders, leaders of color, first generation leaders. Too often, those of us from underrepresented groups are told explicitly or implicitly to be careful, to aim within the bounds of what is expected, to be competent but not bold. In both pitching and leadership, it's easy to underestimate your reach, to aim safely rather than ambitiously. For those approaching leadership from the margins, there's often unrelenting pressure to be careful, to not miss, or to conform to narrow expectations about what leadership should look and feel like. But leadership, real leadership, requires the opposite. To throw higher is to envision something beyond what others think possible, to lead with imagination, with hope, and with the audacity to redefine what excellence and inclusion can mean. It's also about refusing to shrink our aspirations to fit within the contours of other people's comfort. Throwing higher means setting visionary goals, advocating for transformational change, and daring to reach beyond what's comfortable. In leadership, it's about seeing yourself not as a caretaker of existing systems, but as a shaper of the future, lifting others and the institution to higher ground. Yet it's not enough to throw higher, you also need to throw harder, to use your full strength, even when the world is telling you to hold back. Those of us from the margins are often socialized to soften their impact, to be diplomatic, deferential, or invisible, to avoid backlash. Lucchino's advice flips the script with the enjoinder to bring your full power to the moment. In academia, throwing harder means bringing the full force of your intellect, your integrity, and your courage to every challenge. It means speaking with conviction, making tough calls, standing firm in one's values, and refusing to temper your strength just to appear agreeable. It is the willingness to take decisive action, even when others doubt your strength or question your right to lead. My serendipitous coach's advice to throw higher and harder than you think you need to acknowledge something else that every marginalized leader understands. The distance between effort and recognition is not equal for everyone. There are inevitable headwinds, and a pitch that appears strong to you may be judged as average or inadequate by spectators who are conditioned to underestimate you. The world often demands more of us, more excellence, more energy, more precision, more composure, and more grace to land in the same strike zone of legitimacy and respect. But there's also a power in that overextension, power that comes from building muscles of resilience and empathy, making us not only stronger, but more humane leaders. Existing social structures in which systemic biases persist demand over preparation, over performance, and over resilience. But they also illustrate the transformative power of showing what's possible when you refuse to be constrained by others' prejudices and preconceptions. When we throw higher and harder than we think we need to, we expand the horizons for everyone who follows. And then, of course, there's the pitch itself. Throwing out the first pitch is a moment of public visibility, brief, symbolic, and watched by thousands. Academic leadership is similar. Each decision, each statement is a visible act that represents much more than one individual. The key is to step onto the mound, own the space, and throw with intention, not fear. In this way, Lucchino's advice captures a universal truth about courageous leadership. Don't hold back. It is a reminder to counteract the messages of smallness that institutions often send, to take the full space of one's authority, vision, and voice, and to lead with moral courage and moral resilience. Moral resilience enables individuals to navigate ethically challenging situations without experiencing long-term negative effects and ultimately bolsters moral courage. The moral resilience of leaders contributes not only to their individual well-being, but also influences they lead and their institutional cultures. Just as a sense of hopelessness and powerlessness can have negative impacts on the work environment, cultivating and exhibiting moral resilience reflected in the capacity to sustain, restore, and deepen one's integrity in response to moral complexity, confusion, distress, or setbacks can create cultures of hope. Nurturing an environment that promotes moral resilience requires ongoing engagement in dialogue, combined with retrospective and prospective analysis of complex case studies and ethical dilemmas and professional obligations. When practiced at all levels, these exercises propel not only resilience, but trust building as well, by making transparent the core values and principles to which the leader is appealing and the integrity with which the action in response to challenges are being carried out. Reaching out to other campus leaders who are experiencing similarly high levels of stress can offer benefits. Yet having a trusted colleagues on one's own leadership team who will assist with reality testing is vital. Truth is nonpartisan and foundational to both academic leadership and democratic life. Jessica Riddell, the Shakespearean scholar I mentioned earlier in relation to hope circuits, showcases the importance for academic leaders of surrounding themselves by those who will tell them the truth. In discussing the role of the fool in Shakespeare's plays, she emphasizes that they were not simply entertainers. The fool was also crucial to the king's success. Under the guise of humor or madness, these truth tellers held up a moral and political mirror to the king's behavior in ways that exposed hypocrisy and other weaknesses. Through irony, satire, and exaggeration, the fool acted as the king's conscience and offered advice that prompted both growth and the capacity to confront shortcomings. Riddell makes clear that all successful leaders need trusted colleagues who can question dominant narratives, challenge authority, and speak honestly without fear of retribution. Successful presidents are skilled at creating ascendant narratives for a variety of audiences, even in the darkest of times. The fool can ensure that that narrative is one that inspires hope without lapsing into toxic positivity. Instead of avoiding conflicts involving competing values and principles, effective active academic leadership, like Shakespeare's fools, are trained to lean into them by holding opposing viewpoints in tension while searching for the truth, even at the expense of comfort. This skill is more important than ever at a time when campus leaders are continually confronted by the challenges they're facing. Learning to engage in continuous self-reflection and to laugh at oneself occasionally can contribute to both resilience and mutual trust. One approach to this continual self-reflection is offered by executive coach David Brendel, who points to the advent of philosophical counseling and the way these advisors guide their clients through structured conversations designed to facilitate an understanding of one's values and goals. According to Brendel, the process they utilize can be adopted without visiting a counselor if one is willing to engage in self-reflection around a series of questions. He suggests an approach called SANE, which draws on questions posed by four Western philosophers or traditions: Socrates, Aristotle, Nietzsche, and the existentialists. Socrates, what's the most challenging question someone might ask me about my current approach? Aristotle, what character virtues are most important to me and how will I express them? Nietzsche, how will I direct my will to power, manage my self-interest, and set and act in accordance with my chosen values? And the existentialists, how will I take full responsibility for my choices and the outcomes to which they lead? The process of self-reflection around these philosophical issues can help position all leaders for success. In a moment of enormity for higher education, moral courage cannot be optional. It means standing up even when doing so costs something. It means protecting the right to think freely and to teach the truth in the face of intimidation. It means remembering the purpose of higher education is not to comfort the powerful, but to empower those who are seeking knowledge. So when the winds of fear and expediency tell us to play it safe, keep in mind Lucchino's advice. Throw higher and harder than you think you need to, because the arc of integrity, like the arc of a good pitch, only reaches its target when we put the force of our full selves behind it. So thank you so much. I look forward to your questions that you can continue to put in the chat. Yeah. Um, so there's a question about commenting on how students might exert their own agency to promote these transformations. They are in many ways. At AAC&U, we talk about protest as a high impact practice, and there was a good deal of controversy after the attacks on by Hamas on Israel and the protests that unfolded in the face of that, and what that meant in terms of personal and social responsibility and calls for silencing certain voices. But we've seen from not only protests around justice, but the curriculum. There are widespread protests right now around AI because of the environmental impact of the use of AI. And there's pressure being put by some students on others to not use AI at all. Um, we have to encourage students to work with their advisors and with their faculty to engage in the kinds of pedagogies that I talked about that will lead to equitable classroom and college environments. And there too, we are seeing this through organizations that are meant to be peer advocate organizations for students with learning differences, for students from marginalized groups. And so I think that more than anything is going to contribute to the transformations that we'll see. You can enter your questions into the Q&A if you have them. And it's an interesting question that was just posted on whether accreditation bodies are prepared to promote the transformation I'm calling for. As we know, the accrediting bodies are themselves under assault, seen as politically motivated champions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we've seen in Florida that there has been an independent accrediting body that has been established. And I expect we'll see more of this. This was part of President Trump's campaign promise when he ran for his latest term. Uh, I think that the accrediting bodies have remained consistent in their promotion of student success. Um, And it will be interesting to see whether they can stand up to the political pressure to measure success in the ways that we've talked about, ranking and sorting, SAT scores. At AAC&U, we talk about the need for not only college-ready students, but to ask the question, is your college student ready? What does it mean to educate a diverse student body, diversity of all sorts, and how do you create an equitable learning environment? And so as we look at the kind of pressure that accrediting bodies will feel, they are themselves engaging in strategic planning to find ways to measure belonging, excellence as a process, as opposed to this ranking and sorting metrics, and providing support for faculty who have a more critical role than ever in ensuring that we get beyond our abysmal retention rate in higher education, in American higher education. Other questions? Oh. The college and university leaders who are playing an important role in this type of transformation. I mentioned one, uh, Nancy Cantor at Hunter College, um, Mary Dana Hinton, who is at Hollins, is uh, writes about leading with love, and she is shaping a culture in her institution that meets each of the pillars that I outlined. There are folks like Jonathan Alger at American University, who has doubled down on kindness and civic engagement. The University of Hartford, where I served as a provost, lives up to its tagline every single day of committed to community, and what that means in terms of being a visible force in the lives of those who are most underserved, and meets political scientist Benjamin Barber's notion of colleges and universities as civic missions. But I see examples across the country of ways in which this is unfolding. I just was down at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and looked at the ways in which they're engaging in innovative programs in a new general education curriculum, and on the campus of Grinnell in Iowa recently. So there are a number of different ways in which leaders are enacting different parts of this. And the question is, how can we work together to bolster this, to bring it to scale across the country? All right. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. This uh, has been a pleasure to be able to present to you. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can answer any questions or if you want to have an exchange. Please visit altliberalaarts.org to stay up to date on any upcoming webinars and events. All online offerings are available free of charge, and you can also view past webinars, including this one, online at Alt Liberal Arts YouTube channel. So thank you so very much for all that you do for your leadership, and enjoy the day. Take care.